Thank you so much, Yael. I'm inspired by you each time that we meet. And now we will have really few minutes for questions or anything that you would like to say. We'd love to hear your voice. Professor Leonardo.
Who helped you to be who you are?
Well, all alone is a theme amongst people who are... He asked me who inspired me or who helped me to become who I am. Well, the closest person to that job description is my lawyer. So, now I didn't write the lawsuit, she did that. And I didn't argue with them in court, she did that. But...
The lady.
Lady lawyer, no, she's no lady, but yeah, a woman. Yeah.
I have to tell that your experience is something we experience every day in court. The only thing is it happens in court. You know, in court we help, we try to help, and this is how we persuade child abuse victims to testify. We always say this is the time, although it's behind closed door, but this is the only time that everybody will come to hear your story. And it is a very powerful moment, and that we experience every day when we hear a child or a teenager coming and telling his story. We feel in many ways it's even therapeutic, this part, but it's done behind closed doors, and sometimes it's a loss.
More questions, yes.
Firstly, I want to say thank you for your courage. I think that's most importantly where victims who actually share their stories. And certainly I certainly feel a lot of the things that you went through, because I also had to fight for my name to be allowed by the courts in Australia, very similar circumstances. So did I. I'm making Aliyah next week.
Oh, good luck.
So I just wanted to make a few comments about a few things. The first speaker talking about the issue, the example of that girl who wanted to speak to the therapist much more not about the abuse, but the way her parents responded. That's very common amongst the abuse victims I've spoken to, where within institutions or within the home, where ultimately they feel that that is a secondary form of abuse, and often it's at least at the same level as at the abuse itself. The way the parents respond, the way the institution responds. So that's something certainly I agree with. The issue of social media only came up once, I think it was by Isabel, and even then it was more in a negative way in terms of people writing things about social workers and the like. I think, conversely, I think it's a very helpful tool. I think it's been used very effectively. Certainly I've used it effectively in my campaign to get some awareness and affect some change. So I think that needs to be recognised as a potential tool as well. In terms of a model for the media to work closely on this issue, there's a great model in Australia. I'm not sure if everyone is aware, there's a Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse, that's the full name, which in a few words, it's basically the Australian government investigating institutions across the country to examine about sexual abuse in particular, the abuse that happened, what the institutions knew, how they responded, and in some cases, if there is evidence of criminal action, then they recommend that to the police to take action. The reason I mentioned that Royal Commission is because they've been working very closely with the media from the very beginning. They have regular briefings, and the Royal Commission is very forthcoming with a lot of the information. So the media has a lot of stories to actually publish, which relates to my final point about the journalists and their role. I'm not sure that's necessarily the journalist's role to provide solutions. I think a journalist's role, in my opinion, is to provide the facts as accurately as possible. Of course, in some cases, they need to do it responsibly, to offer helplines at the end of the articles. Ultimately, it's up to us to provide the solutions as activists, as experts, whether it's through opinion pieces or in other ways. But we can't just leave it all to the media all the time. We need to work with them to provide them those stories, to sell them the stories. A story like that, a personal story, that's what they're mostly interested in. And it seems to me, after hearing what happens in Israel, where they're not allowed to go even into a courtroom. I mean, in Australia they can, in other places also they're allowed to go into the courtroom, but obviously a child's or family names or whatever it is redacted so they can't be identified. But I think that's perhaps something that needs to be changed over here to allow, and I know as a lawyer you didn't seem to be a fan of that, but I think that that's something that needs to happen in order to change that culture. So I think we need to work around that. Anyway.
Thank you very much, Manny, and good luck with your Aliyah. I think we're close to or behind our time. I think this fascinating panel makes us want to meet here again tomorrow and to continue discussing and learning about these issues, because since this morning we've come quite a way in what we've heard and learned today, and there's so much more to do. So thank you very much, Karmit, Isabel, Oshrat, and Yael for being here.